Today, I'm really excited to be joined by my good friend, Tom Head, who planted and is the team leader at East End Church in London. Tom, hello.
Hello. How you
Hello.
doing?
Great to have you with us. Tom, before we dive into the podcast, I have to say I had a conversation with Steph Liston recently, and we learned that he's a boxer. I know you're a boxer.
Yes.
So we're trying to arrange a fight.
Yeah.
Trying to work out, who do you think would win between you and Steph Liston?
Yeah. Well, you're presuming that we haven't already had that fight, you know. So you've seen that scene. I think it's the end of Rocky 3 or whatever, where Apollo Creed and Rocky get in the ring behind closed doors. Well, that was me and Steph. You know, we've done that. And just to say, he was the one wearing the crop top. You know. But yeah.
I think he said that you would win, which I thought was very kind of him.
And probably inaccurate, but I'd win if I caught him early on, but I'd never catch him after that, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping we can turn this podcast into a fight arranging meet. So we're going to start opening a PayPal account, people to put bets on between Steph and Tom, two ministry heavyweights going in the ring as featherweight. Featherweight, what's lighter than a feather? Boxers.
Yes.
Well, Tom, it's great. I'm really excited to have you with us. Tom and I, we first met in a hotel in the middle of the woods for a secret liaison one time. It was for a conference, I should say that. You were there for the same conference I was at, but that's where we first connected, in a hotel, and since then become friends, and we preached at each other's churches.
Yes.
And you've spoken at Impact, the training program. And everyone speaks so highly of you, Tom. Your wisdom is so just down to earth and yet profound at the same time. And so I'm looking forward to all the juicy nuggets of wise gold you're going to throw out in the next however long we speak for. All right? No pressure.
I'm looking forward to hearing myself, to be honest, after that. That's great.
Well, Tom, as we get into it, why don't you just, it's been probably the weirdest year of ministry you could have had. Why don't you tell us something either about yourself or leadership you've learnt during this season?
I don't know about learned it anew, but it kind of confirmed to me that I really am rubbish with computers. That's probably been the amount of times. If I had £1 for every time someone has said you're on mute or something like that, I'm not good with computers. I've managed, and it's been a steep learning curve, but not enjoying. So we're getting back together now, face-to-face meeting, and I can't tell you the relief of that, because God doesn't speak over Zoom. He doesn't speak to me. He just, you know, I don't know if they got a bad connection up there or what, but prophetically I struggle on Zoom and stuff. So actually getting back with people, I'm really enjoying that. And I guess I've learned that. I'm much better face-to-face than I am through the internet.
Yeah. Well, I guess coming from the background you have come from, you weren't expected to be good with computers in the majority day job you've had the majority of your life. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you did prior to leading the church in East End, and how that came about?
Yeah, well, I was a roofer for many years. I worked on building sites for best part of 25 years. I was naughty boy at school, left with literally no formal education, and then my parents said, "Look, you've got to get a trade. You know, you've got to do something useful." And so I did. I that was good advice. I went and got a trade. I learned carpentry and joinery. I went to college in Brighton doing that. And it was while I was on that course, working on building sites, that I met a geezer who was a Christian. He said he was a Christian, but he didn't look like one. And that was the bit that kind of intrigued me, because I had this picture of what a Christian was like. He was a big lump, and he was, you know, just looked like everyone else. But he loved Jesus, and I was impressed with his courage, standing up in front of a load of young builders, and saying that he went to church and he read the Bible. And we were taking the mickey out of him, something rotten, but there was something very genuine that. To this day, I can't really remember what he said, but I just remember his courage. And he invited me to church, And I was saying, "Oh, I don't need to go to church." And so he goes, "Well, what are you doing with your life?" And I thought, "Oh, he's got me. I don't know. You know, I'm just doing everything that my mates are telling me to do." And he says, "Well, you need to come along yourself and find out, don't you?" And I thought, yeah, he's got me. And I remember going to church with him. I had to have a couple of beers before I went. I was saying, please don't tell anyone I've come to church. I was so embarrassed, but there was this irresistible drawing of God. I look back now, and then I went to church and met some really nice people, and you know, very different to anything I'd been to before. And then they started telling me about Jesus and the fact that Jesus was a builder, and that he could forgive someone like me. And I've not really got over that yet, Jez. So that was the start of it, yeah.
And I think that's something I always pick up when I talk to you. You know, even when we were praying together earlier, you seem to have a very just kind of genuine and honest, real relationship with Jesus. And when you talk about what Jesus is doing in the church, you're not someone who strikes me as religious per se. You're someone who clearly has a kind of day-to-day life with Jesus. What does it look like for you, and how have you cultivated a relationship of just living with Jesus as a friend as much as, you know, worshiping God as a father in the heavens?
Wow. I think I've just read lots of Bible, if I'm honest. Got to know. When I was younger, my parents sent me to Sunday school with 10p. So me and my brother used to go to the local Methodist Sunday school. That was to get us out of the house, and so my understanding of Jesus was based on, it was basically Zacchaeus up a tree and Noah's Ark for a few years when I went to Sunday school, because my parents just wanted to lay in, I think. But when I started reading the Bible and I started coming to church, and I was so hungry, honestly, because I was so sick of the way I was living before. It wasn't. There was no. I don't miss any of it at all. You know, there was no. I turned my back on it. It was so dead. There was no appeal. And then when I started to get to know Jesus, that he was more than just these cartoon characters with skipping lambs and stuff, but there was this earthy, real person that gathered around him, normal people. I was hooked, you know, and I kind of, the more I've got to know Jesus, the more and more impressed I've got. Like, you get a new phone or a new car or whatever, you know, a couple of weeks you're a bit bored. You've tried every button and everything, but with Jesus, it's just this eternal kind of wonder of this person, and you keep getting these different layers. And you know, I think I pray and I read my Bible. That's pretty much it. You know, yeah.
You talk about your friend who introduced you to Jesus as not being a stereotypical Christian. I guess that's part of what we're wanting to have this conversation about is, in essence, church for working class people, church as well for done in a way that engages with men, builders as you were. What are some of the challenges as someone who wasn't used to going to church? What are some of the things that preconceptions you had about the Christian life, religion in general, that you kind of just you felt to be like a brick wall keeping you away from church, as opposed to the Jesus that you got to know and, like you said, have walked with? How did you, I guess, does that make sense? Could you untangle some of that for me?
Yeah. Well, I think I presumed it was a religious add-on. You know, it was an option. It was take it or leave it. If you were that way inclined, then you would go to church. So it was generally, you know, effeminate men or old ladies that were my representation of what I thought church was. And so when I first went to this church and saw relatively normal people around that room, that in itself just knocked barriers down. I thought, well, if people like this can engage with God, you know, there must be more to it. And I think there was that that made me look at Jesus for myself, I think, and keep looking at Jesus when there was weird stuff that came about.
Well, I mean, I'm really excited to get your thoughts on church and ministry to people who aren't just effeminate men and women. You know, God bless them, and old women. Sorry, God bless them. We love church. We love that God brings all these people together. You're absolutely right. There's a whole kind of group of society that is very rarely seen dead in a church.
Yeah.
And you seem to kind of break the mold in the sense that you represent that community, or you're from that community, and so hearing from you, guess how you planted the church that you did in the East End, and what are some of the lessons you've learned about reaching people in that part of the country. Start with the question, I guess, of how did you come to plant the church after being a roofer for 25 years?
Yeah, so I got born again in Brighton. That was where I was, and then I just got very excited by God very quickly. Got excited by church. I volunteered for everything, and it seemed that the keen ones would go and plant churches. So there was a rallying call to plant a church along the coast, and I put my hand up and says, "Yeah, go on, I'm going." I look around and there's only about 40 people going, but I thought, "Oh, okay, we can do this." And I moved along the coast and got involved in church planting. And very quickly recognised that, you know, coming from a big established church where I've got such a good grounding and such, you know, immediate relationships and stuff, into a church plant situation where if I didn't turn up, things didn't get done and I was missed. In a big church, I could hide a bit. It was a strange one. There was a lot of positive stuff. There was some difficult things, but some of the difficult things meant that by default I became one of the longest standing members of that church. So I got opportunities to lead that I possibly wouldn't have had it not been more tricky. I got opportunity to just give my testimony. I got wheeled out regularly at baptisms to give my testimony about, you know, what Jesus had done for me. But all the while, there's this sense of, I've only got one life. We've just got one life. Really want to make it count, you know. And it was by this time I've met Rach, my wife, and she's worse than me, you know. So she's just kind of, we want to make it count, and we would go to these various appeals for the mission field or whatever, and we got called everywhere. Honestly, I remember once going up to a meeting up in Bedford where this really impressive couple were moving out to Turkey. So we were there, sat there going, come in, we'll go to Turkey. And so we were off to Turkey, and then about 2 weeks later, there was an appeal for the millions in India that were unreached. And we're like, oh, we're going to India, And in the end, I spoke to someone that just sort of says, listen, you go to London because they're all there, you know, and if you've just got you've got one shot and there's no sort of sense of clear, just go to London and you can try out your calling on all these different communities and stuff. And I think that was one of the appeals of London. There's one of everything, you know. There's different communities. I have got unreached people on my road, you know, but I can still eat mashed potato, and you know, I haven't got to learn the language in as intense way. And so there was that sense of, I've got one life, I want to make it count. I want to go where there's the most diversity, the most opportunities to lift up Jesus. I say it all clear now. It was all muddling through, but that's basically what happened. And so we, you know, started speaking to the leadership and the apostolic guys down there, sort of saying that we're thinking of London. We came up and done a outreach team or two, and in various parts of London, and made, and in fact that's where I met Steph, actually, on one of them teams. No, when we had some connection with youth stuff in the past, but where we sort of meaningfully connected there, and met people like Paul Brown and others that were just really breath of fresh air. You know, they get me. I get them. There was some really impressive families, I've got to say, some big families raised in the inner city that you know, we thought that wasn't what I was expecting. I remember a guy, bit of an aside, but I remember a guy that I was working for. He was a boss in this roofing firm, and he goes, "What do you want to go to London for?" You know, like he was involved in church and stuff, and he kept going on and on. He goes, "Oh," because Rachel was pregnant with my first, you know, with Alfie, my son. And he's saying, "Why are you going up there? You know, it's dangerous and, you know, it's irresponsible. Why you want to go up?" And in the end, I just go, "Because I don't want them to end up like your kids." You know, like, because they were, seriously, all they used to do was hang out and around a phone box and get up to no good in the village where they were. And I just got fed up. And some of the families I met in the city actually were a lot more rounded and a lot more earthed than you'd imagine, actually. And that was
Yeah, you mentioned, you touched on something there. Have you found it, obviously before moving to London, but have you found there to be a bit of let's say snobbishness or a kind of a prejudice attitude towards the East End, or towards people have this view of kind of East End working class London as, like that guy said, like dangerous, beyond the pale, unreachable, really hard, really difficult, as if to say we should all just try to seek out the suburbs and the beautiful English countryside villages. That's what Jesus wants for us, isn't it? To hide from places of difficulty. Have you found that attitude? I mean, because I've heard you say before that 98% of the church in the UK can be described as middle class. Maybe it's not helpful to always talk in class terms, but what are some of the, you said you met Paul Brown and Steph and you felt like they got you. What are some of the defining characteristics then, would you say, that either you recognized before getting there, or that really made you click when you got there?
I think there was an honesty so my discipleship process was my walk with God, going to church on Sunday, and then it was shoulder to shoulder with roofers, with builders. You know, that was my upbringing, and what I learned in that situation was brutal honesty, and a spade's a spade, and, you know, it's not very little pretense. And I think, looking back, my experience of church has been, and when I say working class and middle class, sometimes barriers go up. So I'm talking in huge generalizations, but I for communication purposes, I will define myself as a working class man in a largely middle class kind of church environment. And I found that whereas I had the honesty on the building site, actually I learned to be polite in a church setting, which meant that I was more cautious about what I said, and I found that people often wanting to be more polite didn't say what they meant, and so that became. I've had a few instances over the years where people have said stuff, and they've said it. What they really want to say, they've couched it so politely that I didn't even know what they were talking about, and it feels disingenuous, and it feels like they're being two-faced, and I know they're not, but there is that. If you was to ask this fella laying tiles on the roof next to me, what do you think about this? They would answer you, generally speaking, and then you knew where you stood, and you might not like it, but I appreciated the honesty. And knew where I stood, and I guess the East End. Now, the East End is so mixed, and there's huge gentrification of areas as well. But generally speaking, it's all out there. You know, we haven't got the luxury of pulling up your driveway, shutting the net curtains, and having your argument in hushed tones. You know what I mean? It's all out there. You go down the street and you will see arguments in the street. I've had people having huge conversations or arguments from the landing on the flats to the pavement and that, because they ain't got the luxury of space and privacy. So life is lived more cheek by jowl, you know, and it there's obvious disadvantages to that, because you're kind of never alone. You know, the nearest I get to being on my own is putting my earphones in and walking down the canal. But even then, you're surrounded by people, so it's not like I can just walk up the downs or something like I used to. But what it does mean is that you've faced more stuff, so you're shaped more quicker. Like our kids, you know, like the stuff that we've faced on a school run is stuff that we could deal with there and then. You know, in terms of prostitutes or you know, drugs and stuff like that. Like my kids could recognise the smell of weed from a very early age, and knew who the junkies were, and oh, is he waiting for some gear, Dad? Or you know, we've had. There was once we was doing a school run and there was a shootout, and the police sort of says, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to have to go down that road now, you know, but it's not always that dramatic, but there are those dramatic moments. And they've been opportunities to train my kids. They haven't learnt about that through telly or the school playground. That's been with Dad, with Mum on the school run, and we've been able to talk about those sort of things. Sorry, I've got a bit distracted there, but I can't remember what the question was.
That's really helpful, just giving us a flavour of what life's like in the East End. But I mean, you know, a number of people I'm sure listening would really relate to that observation of church, and there's a fine line between politeness and deception, or being slightly two-faced. And you know, the reasons for politeness might come from a good place. You might be able to say, I don't want to offend, but often it comes from a place of fear, that I don't want people to think badly of me, so I'll be polite, or I won't say the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Yes. And so I mean, in being pastor of a church, presumably you're always trying to stand in that intersection between different communities in the church, you know, people from different backgrounds, trying to help them understand and relate to one another. What are some of the ways that you've helped what you described as the middle class polite speak, yes. Kind of learn to speak a little bit more simply and honestly, rather than couching their truth in lots of, you know, questions and polite comments and remarks? What are some of the ways that you've helped them do that? But then equally, what are some of the ways that you've helped the working classes kind of understand, oh, they don't really mean this, they mean that, and you have to really kind of, without them feeling like they've got to become middle class? Because I think that's often the challenge. If as you said, the church is 98% middle class, then someone enters that community, they instantly feel like, whether, you know, implicitly or explicitly, they feel like, I've got to change my language to be here. And yet what I so appreciate in the way that you talk about Jesus is you put him in his proper context and recognize, oh, he was a builder, he was a builder's son. And because of, he's kind of been hijacked as becoming this holier than thou figure who's a very religious, formal spoken man. And yet you hear the way that he rebuked and spoke plainly to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He calls a spade, or he calls a whitewashed tomb a whitewashed tomb. He calls a hypocrite a hypocrite, and a snake a snake. I've thrown lots of thoughts and questions at you there. Can you make sense of any of that?
I think it's like they reckon in every group of mates there's one idiot. You know, and if you don't know who that is, then it's probably you, you know. And I think that sometimes you can go to church, and especially as a leader of a church, if you are entirely comfortable with the culture of the church, then the church is your culture. And so for someone to come into that culture, it's a huge shock. It's a literal culture shock coming in, and it's kind of the equivalent of like a nice polite church pastor walking into the roughest pub in town, or going into a betting shop, or a tattoo parlor, or a boxing club, or something like that. It's that kind of extreme the other way around, you know. And so I think there's got to be a deliberate. It depends who you want to go for, you know, because it's depending on the context you're in. You've got to contextualize your gospel and your life and ministry to who it is you're going for. And so as I say, to be honest, I could with the team of guys around me, they're so quality, we could go for any community in London, in a sense. We could go for the hipsters, there's lots of them around, or we could go for the Bengalis, there's a huge sort of community of Bengalis in the area, or Muslims, or we could have black majority church or whatever. But what I kind of have noticed, and possibly coming in from a large middle class community before, coming in and seeing the working class is so under represented in the church, there was this desire for me to reach these guys that I'm used to rubbing shoulders with up a roof, and so there's I've kind of been unapologetic in terms of going for that. As a team, we've been unapologetic for going for that, recognizing that, to be honest, there's plenty of other churches around for you if not, but there's not that many that are going for these earthy people that, and don't get me wrong, we're doing that, but we are reaching a right cross section. So it's not, everyone's a pearly king or queen when you come on a Sunday. There's a mixture of, cultures and races and age groups and social classes as well. But we have unapologetically gone for those that we've seen as unrepresented.
That's a beautiful illustration, really helpful, because as someone who's not familiar with going to tattoo parlors or betting shops, I know, when I did get a tattoo, I know that experience. But even that, the tattoo parlor has become a little bit more gentrified, hasn't it? It's become a lot more about self-expression, which is quite a middle class kind of pursuit. Let me get some art on myself to make myself look cool, which is where we go. But you're right, like we've all had that experience of walking into a pub where we're like, I don't belong here. And actually the church is this fascinating community, that it's a family, that so when you turn up, it should feel like, oh, it's my family. Like you shouldn't feel like you're walking into a stranger's house every time you go, but at the same time, it should never feel so comfortable that you think, oh, it's my chair, or that's my seat, or those are my slippers, or this is my whatever, that we're a family that's constantly saying, oh, we're not actually here for ourselves, we're here for others, aren't we? And so we turn up with a different frame in mind. So, but just that illustration I find really helpful. And so what are some of the ways that you've kind of tried to intentionally make sure that you have not tried to, you've done church in such a way that appeals to people whom a lot of churches it wouldn't appeal to, but then B, try to make sure that they don't feel they've got to squeeze into some middle class polite mold, that they're allowed to speak their mind, they haven't got to be polite, all of those things that you described. What's some of was it strategic, or is it just fairly intuitive for you?
I think, but being honest with you, the sheer fact I am who I am gives people permission. Oh, so people like that can lead, people like that can speak in a microphone. I think that has been probably an easier journey. I think that we're very, very deliberate in welcoming guests. We honour the fact that it takes a lot of bottle to come through those doors the first time, and also every other week at least we're saying, look, you come in here for the first time, you look around and you presume everyone's all right. Listen, we're all works in progress. God is but by the grace of God we're standing here, and don't presume. Get to know people, get to know their stories, like ask people, how did you start coming? Because there's some blinding stories about God's incredible grace changing people. But when people turn up on Sunday and everyone's, working class, whatever, they're generally quite polite on a Sunday and well behaved. So we really big up the fact that, people are there for the first time. We make a big part of that, I guess, is that evangelistic kind of bent in me and my team actually to reach out. So we will have a, between the worship time and the preach, we have a break so people can go and have a wee or a fag or something, and then they can come back in, and and an opportunity to say hello to people. So that kind of stuff, and just want to totally get away from the fact that people presuming that the people at the front are all together. You know, I'm not airing my dirty laundry every single week, but there are moments when I'll share my struggles, or it's not unusual for people to just to try and drop the facade, so that people don't feel like that.
Do you find there's implications for, say, church size or group sizes? Because again, people have shared with me before, just if you're on a building site, you're around a group of lads, maybe 4 or 5 of you that you'll see every day, all day, you'll be around them. And then often you come to church and you're forced to sit in a room, like a small group or a life group, a group of 15 people, mixed ages, men and women, having polite conversation, which doesn't, or you might go to like a church, it's like a mega church, it's more like going to the theatre, it's a show. Again, it doesn't feel authentic and genuine in a lot of the ways that a builder's yard would do. Are there implications for group size and church size in the way that you structure your meetings in that way?
Yeah, probably not deliberately, but I think you're probably right. I think that this Sunday, you've heard, it's a shop window, the Sunday sort of thing, and that's the entry level coming in. And then we have connect groups during the week. There's alpha groups and men's ministry and various different bits and pieces throughout church outside of the Sunday meeting. And I think that's probably one of the things, just kind of encouraging humility to learn from one another, because there is always something to learn from one another. And for middle class people, that's quite a big deal to have the humility to recognize that you're going to learn something from a working class person, because there's this perception that failure at an academic level equals thick, and actually what you find is people from working class backgrounds, from all kind of backgrounds, they have faced stuff in life that you can't learn out of a book. It's actually, there's and so it's kind of encouraging the humility that you might know the Bible references better than this person. You might be able to read, but actually this English is the second language for this person, or I reckon about 60% of the people I work with on the building site would struggle to read. That's the truth of it. So putting a paperback in someone's hand doesn't necessarily cut it. But the relational doing life side by side is massively underrated, I think.
Yeah, it seems quite a middle, maybe I've never really thought of it as middle class, but it seems quite a middle class way of discipling someone. Welcome to church, I'm glad you're a Christian, read this book. This will really help. You think, well, Jesus didn't do that. So you instantly putting on someone to become a Christian means you need to read this. Now, I mean, fair enough, in Jesus' society, studying the Torah or the scrolls, whatever, was quite a common part of life. So there is the challenge of how you get Bible into people and truth into people who don't read. People often say, well, there's audiobooks, you can listen to audiobooks, but even what you just said there, it's a lot more about living life alongside one another and allowing things to take years rather than weeks and days. Discipleship is not a read this and you'll be a disciple now, you'll be a Christian, which is what we can do sometimes unintentionally when we create a course called, like, I don't know, beginning or foundations, and we say, do this course and then you'll have got it. Well, they'll have got some information, some core doctrine, but if they haven't got a Christian to walk through life with from that course, they're not necessarily going to go much further. It was fascinating. I've not really thought of that before as being not necessarily a helpful strategy for discipling everybody.
And what we're after is we want followers of Jesus. We want people that go and follow in Jesus' footsteps, and that is so much more inclusive than you've got to look like this, you've got to be at this educational standard. It's like, so now you're a disciple of Jesus. Now a follower of Jesus could be right back there. But you don't know the family background they've had. You don't know the struggles that they've had, the prejudices that they've faced, or the difficulties in life. Some of the people in our church, you look at them, and and you see some of their behaviours, and you think, oh my goodness, seriously, that's awful. But if you knew where they'd come from, that's a massive kind of step forward. Like a couple of examples. Like these people. There's some guys that come to the church that pretty violent backgrounds. Like really aggressive. There's one fella particularly I remember going to. Used to meet up with him at the boxing club. Used to do a Bible study with him at the boxing club on a Thursday, and we used to turn up there. And we was up there once, and there was this conversation on the phone, and apparently what had happened was this guy had split up with his girlfriend, but the boy was still coming up to the boxing club, and he was threatening, why are you letting the boy come? And I'm coming up there with a shooter and all, right dark stuff. And the guy's, my mate's on the phone saying, listen, he says, I'm praying for you, mate. He goes, listen, calm down. He says, I'm praying for your soul. I'm praying Jesus will forgive you and calm you down, but I'm praying for you. And he got off the phone and sort of says, look, sorry, this is what's happened. And I told him I'm praying for him and I want, Jesus to help him in that. Of course, if he comes up here, I'll have to break his jaw. But there was this, but there was this sense, and you think, oh, goodness me, breaking jaws. But from where he was, where he started to where he is now, it's wonderful. And then I think of a girl in a church who she chats and chats and chats and chats, right? And it's exhausting sometimes talking to her because she just talks in there. But when you know where she's come from, she was kept prisoner by an abusive husband, and all manner of abuse took place, to this girl, just awful stuff. And when she finally escaped after being shot, after being in a fire, after this terrible violence and abuse, she's free, and she's no longer having to keep quiet and keep in a corner. She's got this opportunity to express herself in that, and yeah, there's a time to sort of shape it, but if you look at her now, you think, oh, it's this talkative woman that just won't shut up. But if you look at the beautiful kind of process of this woman being shaped by God, now free. I remember being at a New Ground conference thing, and we took her down there, and she was talking and talking. She's in this tent with loads of people, and this couple in front turned around and asked her to shush, because she's, shh, please. And you just kind of want to say, if you only knew, what the joy that she's got now in this thing, and actually there was this beautiful moment where Jesus met with her prophetically in that meeting, and she was significantly healed. So it's like, wow, Jesus wanted her there, even if she was distracting to other people. And but it's what you're kind of looking at, the direction of travel rather than what do they look like now. Where have they started? And every decision that they're making from now on, are they walking towards Jesus or away from Jesus? And no matter if you're a Oxford graduate or a gutter dwelling junkie, if the next step you take is towards Jesus, that makes you a follower of Jesus, and that gives hope. That gives opportunity for the next step and the next step, so that outwardly it might not look the same, but there is this direction of travel that is God honoring.
That's beautiful. And I've often felt like we in the church, you mentioned it in Brighton when people used to get you up to share your testimony. We in the church love a good testimony. We love putting testimonies on the stage. We love talking about life transformation, coming out of your life changed by God. And there's obviously truth. Jesus does change lives, but the danger of phrasing it like that is we sell the Christian life as a product of transformation, like a good cleanup, like a good bottle of detergent or whatever, that can make your life sparkling new again. Whereas actually, as you just said, the Christian life isn't about I was this and now I'm this. I mean, of course, John Newton famously, I was blind but now I see. There's an inner transformation where you can say I was blind but now I'm see. But John Newton was still gambling and still dealing in slaves for much of his Christian life. And so he was like, I'm saved. Yeah, but John, you're still a bit of a wretch. You're still a naughty boy and you've still got a lot to learn. And there is a temptation and a danger in us to say, you know, almost to want to present postcard images of ourselves to the world and tableaus. And we're not. We're living beings who change and have good days and bad days and good weeks and bad weeks. And that's something I suppose I do appreciate. I guess I wouldn't often think in terms of working class, but when you meet someone who's got that kind of organic, like authentic, rugged, salt of the earthness, you think they don't seem to judge you on particular moments. They seem to have the ability to go, oh, he's just having a bad day. Whereas often as a middle class man or as middle class people, you do worry, oh no, one bad day, people will write me off forever. There seems to be a lot less forgiveness in that community or that way of seeing the world. And that's something that I love, that phrase about, you know, direction of travel. You say some more about that and any other stories that you've got that come to mind about that.
I think that's right. I guess that, you know, if my mate at the boxing club backslides, he breaks someone's jaw. If you know, if someone who works in a more, you know, in a middle class, you know, a teacher or something, you know, maybe he'll steal a pen, you know, if he's backside. I'm exaggerating, but you know, it's got bigger implications. But there's still sin, you know what I mean? It's still, and I think the difficulty comes when middle class values get mixed up with Christian values, and you know, there's so niceness becomes the qualification for Christianity rather than actually the biblical kind of, you know, things. And I've seen it. I remember once. I can't remember if I don't think I was in the meeting, but I listened to it, and the guy, who's a brilliant preacher, you know, I'm not knocking him at all. I've learned a lot, but I remember he stood up once and he talked about, okay, let's find out who's in the room. What newspapers do people read? And then it sort of went from the Times, Telegraph down, you know, and all the way down, and then they started getting down to the Daily Mail, and there was walls around the room and all this kind of stuff. Jeez, when I grew up, I thought my mum and dad were posh because they read the Daily Mail, because I went downstairs and read the Sun with my granddad, sort of thing, you know, like you lived in the flat below us, and I'm not saying that it's a better newspaper. That's not my argument, but it was that presumption that oh, this is what we all think, isn't it? And so had I been kind of less secure in the skin that Jesus has put me in, I could have thought, oh, okay, I've got to keep my mouth shut. I know that I better not tell people that. I better start hiding that kind of thing, you know. But the fact is that the Sun and the Mirror have got 3 times the kind of, what's the word, distribution than the Times and the Telegraph put together. You know what I mean? So there's this. If we're not careful, there's these rafts of society that are quickly written off because, you know, they're just quickly written off. And there's things like immigration has much different implications for a builder than it does, say, for a teacher, you know, or you know, management, something, you know, like so often I would hear leaders and that say, you know, immigration is such a blessing, you know, we get all these cultures coming in, opportunity to share the gospel, which I absolutely agree with, but the implications of this influx of Romanians coming in has got a massive impact on me as a roofer who's You know, they're living 10 to a room, you know, undercutting my prices, and me as the sole breadwinner with 5 kids, you know, it's got huge implications for me. But okay, so they're not taking the English teaching jobs, but they are taking my jobs, you know, and it's that presumption that we all think this is a great thing. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a great thing, but you know what I mean? It's got different implications, I think.
I think they certainly, I mean, people say this often, don't they? But that's what we saw in the Brexit vote and Trump, the rise of Trump. You know, the middle classes talk about those things as being evil and bad decisions. And yet, you know, it also people say in the same breath, yeah, but it was a chance for the common man to vote against the elite establishment who thought they were speaking on behalf of the country. Turns out they weren't. They weren't even representing half of the country with the Brexit referendum.
And I'm blagging it a little bit, but I think there's more people that don't vote at all than do for a single party. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's this even the presumption that you vote. You know, these political kind of, and again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there's these presumptions that this is what we all think. This is the Christian way of thinking. Really? I don't know. You know, because I remember. I remember people coming to my door canvassing, sort of saying, "Can we count on your vote and stuff?" And then asking them a question. And this is that middle class thing. It's that sort of you ask them what they think about gay marriage, for example, and they will answer you in a way that they think you want to hear, rather than what they really believe. The only ones that came round and told me what they really believed were the extremists, were like the BNP or the whatever. And I thought, well, I'm not voting, you know, because I can't endorse what they're saying, but I believe them more than I believe you.
Yeah.
You know, it's
yeah. I was also interested as well how things like the sexual revolution has affected family life in the country, to the point that you'd have said 30 years ago in the country, it would have been commonplace, particularly in churches, it would have been commonplace for most couples to be married, most kids to have mum and dad living together. And now that's not the case generally across society, but especially among the inner city working classes. I imagine they've been hit a lot more by the decisions made by what we might class as the middle class elites in the sexual revolution to mess around with the institution of family, then as a knock-on effect generations later. How do you, well, I guess because in churches, the kind of the typical value of marriage and of husband and wife and of that kind of 2.4 family thing that in the 50s was, you know, like you said, or perhaps was synonymous almost with a Christian family. How have you as a pastor just kind of noticed the tide turn or the tilt shift towards, no, most people in this church are divorced once or twice, or most kids in this church don't have both mum and dad living at home? Is that something that you've noticed has changed over the years? And what are some of the ways that you think the church has had to adapt to just acknowledge what people talk about these days? There are different types of families, you know, what we used to call as broken homes, you know, like, oh no, it's just different types of family. We don't use those words anymore. What are some of your reflections on all of that?
That's a tricky,
I'm going to get you in trouble now.
No, well, that's nothing new, Jez. That's all right. I think that if I'm honest with you, I think that the emasculating of men has been one of the biggest kind of byproducts of it. I think in terms of the definition of marriage and homosexuality and homosexual practice being honoured, and I think that there's such a huge thing on society generally. I don't think it's just a working class thing. I think it's what I guess I've been surprised with is just how much that has filtered down into some of the working classes. Whereas in some ways, I think they were the last bastion of morality in some ways, weirdly enough, because it was like this traditional, you know, I'll go to work, I'll put food on the table, my wife looks after the kids, that you know, which sounds so dated and restrictive now, but I think it has filtered down. I think it's this slow drip over the years from media, that has really damaged the fabric of society. I'm not sure if
what do you mean about, help me understand, because I think I understand what you mean, but help me understand, what do you mean when you say the emasculation of men over the past few decades?
Yeah, I think that you've almost got to be apologetic now for being a man's man. You as a bloke, you've got to be, I don't know, you've got to be well groomed, but you not use too much product. You've got to be able to change your baby's nappy and change your car tire. You've got to be a cordon bleu chef, and there's these standards of masculinity that just, it's impossible. You can't please everyone, and I think the undermining of the importance of men has been really seriously damaging. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everything was perfect, and I'm not advocating that we go back to the 1950s kind of housewife model at all. I'm really not. I think there's been some really positive things in terms of empowering women to be who God's called them to be. But I think that what's happened is more and more blokes are taking a back step and not wanting to offend and not wanting to upset unnecessarily. And I think that's certainly in church. I think that there's I just think that the guys are frightened to say that they're really, really responsible for the health of a family, for the health of the kids, for the health of, you show me a society that's failing. You show me poverty. You show me, all manner of social injustice, and I'll show you a society where men are not taking their responsibility. They're just not. They're not taking responsibility for their kids. But I think that's the beautiful opportunity for us as the church, is to be that family, and you've got, I'm forever having to apologize for things I say, like that's politically incorrect or whatever. But our heart as a church is to put the lonely in families, is to, we our problem is not sort of women that are able and strong. Our problem is guys that are passive and just, oh, well, whatever you say, dear, or just like, well, someone else is doing it. That's a bigger problem than anything else. And so but we as the church have got an opportunity to be, certainly as men in the church, to be fathers to the fatherless. Statistically across church, in the UK, I think there are 2 women to every one man in church. And that means that women are taking more and more sort of leading roles, just because they've got to, because blokes are not standing up and taking on the responsibility. That you get the idiots like Harvey Weinstein and stuff like that, and the bullying and the abuse of power, Sarah Everard and all that kind of stuff. But more pervasive is that sort of passive kind of,
I think we've got the two-headed problems, I guess, of toxic masculinity on the one hand and absent masculinity on the other hand. Yes. And often it seems the society's response to toxic masculinity is to tell people to stop it and start behaving nicer and better, to which a lot of men go, I won't bother doing anything then, and so they just overswing the other way. And we have, Yeah, and it's a really difficult conversation to have because, you know, I talked to my friend Andrew Bunt, and I think really helpfully points out we mustn't define masculinity around in ways that the Bible doesn't. You know, I'm a man because I have a penis. Let's just stay there. I mean, our society's even confused about that, dare I say it. But I think, so I hear Andrew's comment, but then I do also resonate with the kind of lived experience of, yeah, but a lot of men are looking for just quite a clear rallying cry and a rallying call. You don't need to perhaps couch it in terms of men do this, men do that.
No.
But men, there is a danger that the church, let me perhaps ask it this way. Do you think that the church, by its very nature, is more feminine than masculine and will always appeal to women more than men by the way that it's set up? Or do you think that's actually a part of the social construction of church, the way that we've made church into something like that?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but I think one of the things, but blokes, we're not fighting wars at the moment, you know, like so we're not. There's not a hill to take or a damsel to rescue, you know, except on Xbox. That's it. So men are not being asked to take ground, you know, and it's like. So I think within churches, we've got to. I think men coming to church, they want it to be purposeful. Okay, it's for a woman, generally speaking, to come to church. That the whole kind of relational family vibe is, you know, that's an end in itself.
It's important enough, yeah.
Yeah. But if you're asking a guy to come to church, you look, if I'm asking my builders mates to come to church, I want them not just to. There is a sense of becoming part of the family because there is such a broken society, and that is a draw, but that's not a keep. You know, that's like there's this. Okay, right. You live on that estate. You need to start winning that estate for Jesus. You know, you need to start praying for those people. Those geezers at work, you need to start bringing them. You need to start, you know, so there's that sense of this is challenge, you know, like the guys, it's been explained to me. And just to say, listen, I listened to Andrew Bunt's one of these. That was the first one I listened to. Blinding, absolute, so helpful, so balanced and so good for people like myself to hear those sort of things. He's so clever and all, isn't he? But it's really genuinely helpful. So I'm not knocking any of that. I'm not in opposition to that, but I will push back and say, yeah, but blokes are the problem here. Blokes are the problem here, and I think that we need to set challenges for guys to take ground and unapologetically be men and you know, stand up. I don't know. Men lead. Men do lead. I think, you know, man was created first, and then Eve. And listen, you might have to edit some of this out because this is dodgy ground, right? But actually, Eve, you know, went against the created order and started to lead. But actually, Adam was still leading because he was held responsible, but he led passively. And it's like for dads with kids, right? You are raising your kids. There's no sort of sitting back and going, oh, the wife will do it or whatever, or I'm not even there for your kids. You are raising your kids, whether you like it or not. You're not on the bench waiting to be, you know, subbed on to do that. You're held responsible for the way you raise your kids. There's a mate of mine who was a bricklayer, got fed up of his wife having a go at him about, you know, coming home and tired out and stuff. And he literally bought a house brick home with him, put it on a table, and he says, right, pick that up. And his wife goes, pick it up. So he picked it up and she put it back down again. He goes, right, do it again. Done it again. He goes, right, now do that 500 times. That's what I've been doing all day long. And you come and give me a brief and all this. And he thought that it's enough for him just to go out and then he can come back and sit back and everything's done for him. We got an opportunity as blokes to model the the sacrificial laying down of our lives for our wives. So when I get up and wash up, or I put my clothes away, or I wipe the surfaces, you know, I'm doing that. I'm modeling Jesus, who laid his life down, you know, for his bride, you know. So we get lots of opportunities. So.
That's really helpful, and I don't think what you said is necessarily controversial. I think often we're always trying to fight on several fronts, depending on what you think the problem of society is. You're going to fight for that corner. If you think the problem is the suppression of women, you're going to fight for, you know, the equal rights of women. But equally, if you think, no, I think the problem is passive men, then actually I need to work out how do we solve society's ills by speaking to passive men. Sometimes we need situations and places where we can just, in a mixed gathering, but say to men, this is what God wants you to do, without the women to hear us as saying, women, you're not important, or women, you can't do those things either.
Seriously.
You know, to say men, you need to step up and lead, isn't to say women, we don't need your leadership. It's to say our problem is passive masculinity and passive men who are leaving their families and leaving their homes. And I guess part of the challenge we've got as well is, you know, in a society like ours, you don't have kids and dads working alongside each other or seeing each other at work all day. So the kids don't know what their dad's like in their office or on the builder's yard. They don't see what they go through, the sweat that they, you know, expend in the interest of getting money to provide for the family. They don't see that. So they just see exhausted dad at the end of the day. So there is that challenge on dad, even though he's exhausted, to stay engaged. I guess in a previous age, or with the father and son businesses, they've got to work together. They'd be alongside each other. The kids would learn, this is how you do business, this is how you behave honestly, this is how you know, don't cut corners, and etc. Because we're working alongside each other. And men often need to be told, God wants you to take responsibility for the people in your world and in your life. And again, he's not there by saying, women, you're not allowed to take responsibility, but he is saying to the men, you must, because perhaps you're more inclined to abdicate your responsibility than women are. Again, we recognize we're talking in broad stereotypes, but stereotypes exist for a reason, because they're generally speaking true. There is a part of the masculine heart, if you know, if the sale of John Eldridge's books speaks anything, and I think it should do, you know, John Eldridge, who wrote Wild at Heart, the sale of those books speaks to something, that there is an aspect in the masculine heart that wants a damsel to rescue, wants a quest to go on, wants a mission to be part of. But my question is, what is it then, or what can we do to help men get caught up in the mission of Jesus, like you said, for their estate, for their family, for their workplace, that doesn't turn them into just ad salesmen who are trying to peddle a product, which is the danger of some of our evangelistic speak. Let's make converts, which can sound like convince people of this product called Christ. And whereas when you talk about being on mission with Jesus, it sounds very attractive, very real. And it sounds like you and Jesus get up to some incredible exploits together. I've said a lot. Let me hear some of your thoughts on all of that.
So I'll go around my friends' to watch football or watch boxing, and I'll come back and my wife says, "Oh, what did you talk about?" It's like, what do you mean? What did we talk about? You know, we watched the football, we watched boxing. You know, that was it. And guys, they do better shoulder to shoulder when they're doing stuff together. So creating opportunities for discipling guys, creating opportunities for them to be shoulder to shoulder. Like, so that's, you know, at least going for a walk, or you know, painting a wall together, or so one of my first acquisitions for the church office when we set up the church was a dartboard, and it's I've never worked in an office before anyway, so it's all new to me. I knew you had to get them clicky balls, so I got the clicky balls. Yes, that was the very first thing I bought. But then we bought a dartboard, and that became a tool in the church office for discipling guys, because it was, and so we would meet together on a Wednesday or whenever it was, and a group of the fellas, new converts, you know, generally speaking, and we would come in and we would play darts, and we would, you know, go through the first chapter of Matthew or something, and then we go through and we chat it through. A lot of banter, a lot of laughs. You know, I think that there's when you look at the way Jesus, when he did preach, a lot of it was stories. It was, you know, parables and I know. I mean, it gets lost in translation a bit, but there must have been humour. There must have been, you know, like banter and, you know, I remember Mark Driscoll saying, you know, you're talking to 12 guys walking around the street. You sure not? There's definitely been one point or another where someone's gone, pull my finger. You know what I mean? There's this kind of there must be that kind of banter with guys and stuff, and to create a space. So we got a beer fridge, we got a dartboard, and then we went through the Bible in that sense, just chatting it through. You know, what did you make of it? What don't you understand? Chatting and shared experience in the room. We've also tried. I'm saying we have because we're just coming out of lockdown.
Yeah. Can I jump in live here? Because I think something comes to mind is just, do you find there are different parts of the Bible that people respond to better? Say, for example, like I got saved in university where we loved the book of Romans because it was, you know, it was a presuppositional book where you could kind of dig into the legal language of the Apostle Paul. And whereas I know other people are like, oh, I don't really like Romans, but the Psalms speak to me. Like, do you find similar, you know, reaching working class men? There's parts of the Bible you think I wouldn't necessarily go there. I might take them to Revelation because that's a bit weird. I don't know anything like that. Yeah, what do you think about
that? I think it depends on where they've started from. You know, like that and the direction of travel and how far along that road there is, but often you can't go far wrong by just looking at Jesus in the Gospels, if I'm honest. And you suss out who he is and you demystify some of the nonsense around him. And the onto a winner anyway. And then when you realise that this man fearlessly tipped tables in you know, in one sentence and then graciously hugged a leper in the other, you know, or lifted a woman caught in adultery, then you suss out who he is, and then you want to hear about Romans, about grace, because you've seen it modelled in this guy, you know. And I guess the stories are just personal, and this is I don't know generally, but personally I like the stories. So I like the history books. I like, you know, in terms of you know, Genesis and Exodus and you know, Samuel, Kings and all that. I love those kind of narrative books. I think I kind of so when we're just starting a series preaching this coming Sunday, looking at the life of Elijah, and just sort of I much prefer going through a character and then revealing Jesus through this character rather than Paul's letters and stuff like that. Man, I struggle with that. I can do it, and I've sort of disciplined myself to do it, but I find it a lot harder to come that way round rather than just pointing to the cross or looking at the Gospels. Yeah,
that's really helpful.
It's just Jesus. It's just wherever you are in the Bible, that you don't get caught up with the doctrines and lose sight of the one that the doctrines are pointing to anyway. You know, you suss out Jesus, and then that's your all of it's for him, to him anyway, isn't it? So it's like get to Jesus as quickly as possible.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
and
really
actually one of the things I have noticed that's relevant to this with working class people is often they're more open to the supernatural, so more open to being prayed. If you can lay your hands on them, go for it, because
you have to ask them first.
yeah, carefully.
Start putting your hands on people.
Jump on them.
Yeah, while you're in the bus queue.
Yeah, but there's because they haven't gone to university and learned how to be cynical. You know, there's this sort of you know, this opportunity that is like a fresh page. You know, they don't critique everything or re-quote something at you as often as you would with someone
I remember you saying before that you often felt that your ministry is you against YouTube, as people see weird things on YouTube and go, yeah, mate, what do you think of this?
Yes, that's true. That's so true. But that's really, I feel like I'm a translator, right? That's and I think in churches that are really serious about reaching out to different communities, and you know, going back to the beginning in terms of, if you feel that you're comfortable in this culture, then that is the culture, and you're not going to be able to reach out to working class people without help, you know. So there's a humility to know that you need them. Your church will be like weaker without that, and to genuinely be convinced by that, and the humility to learn from life experience and straight talking. But there's the sorry, I completely lost track there. I'll come back to that, because it was a good point and all. I had a good. What was the question again?
It was about you versus YouTube, wasn't it? Like
me versus YouTube. Yeah, can't remember.
But I think you're right. I love that phrase about they haven't gone to university and learned to be cynical, and I think it kind of comes back to that cultural elitism that we pick up from, maybe from celebrities or from the media, from news reporters. They seem to kind of present the world as one thing, whereas for the majority of human history, the majority, even as you said, people who don't vote, who read the Sun and the Mail, the majority of probably people in the planet, there are a lot more just concrete, what's called concrete, relational, intuitive, down to earth, rather than that fancy, that word presuppositional, about arguments and intellectualize, and even trying to present a nice veneer on things. No, it's about salt of the earth, trying to survive, trying to get through life, and that means that you've got to be as honest as you can with the people you meet around you, and trying to strip yourselves of pretense. And I think there's a real need for the church to hear a lot of what you're saying. I love your phrase, I'm a translator. I think that's a beautiful description of perhaps what every Christian, every pastor ought to be. I'm a translator. Depending on who I'm talking to, I've got to learn the language that they need me to translate whatever.
That's the bit I was going to say, Jez. You reminded me, because it is. I'll listen to Tim Keller, right? But I'll be honest with you, I often have to listen to him 2 or 3 times before I understand what he's saying, and then I translate what I've learned from him to my people, you know, or you know, Phil Moore or someone, or you know, just kind of Andrew Wilson or something. I listen to him and I think I get it, and then I'll keep listening to it till I've got it, and then I'm translating. And I think within the church, if you're serious about reaching out to the salt of the earth types, that these are the ones that are reached in times of revival. You know, it's not just the middle classes that are affected. It's you know, you think of, you know, Welsh revival or something. You imagine those earthy blokes singing their songs of praise down the mines. You know, because the Spirit of God came on earthy people. And I think if we want to see society change, we put a lot of energy into conferences for the movers and shakers and the media types and the, you know, politicians, and rightly so. But there were so many unnamed people that Jesus met with that were sort of almost incidental. They weren't the great leaders in society. But when you get that, politicians and stuff, they just stick their finger out the window to see which way the wind's blowing. And the wind is blowing from some council estate in East London, where some bloke is saying bluntly what he really believes. You know what I mean? And it's this kind of fearlessness to for that, really.
That's beautiful. I love your challenge and charge to the church there. Something we really need to hear. Tom, I think our time's kind of coming to an end, but is there anything else that's in your heart and mind? Do you think I really want to say this, or I haven't put this across in the way that I'd like to yet? This is bubbling in my mind. Let's get it out.
I guess encouraging leadership from different backgrounds within your church deliberately, and don't write people off use biblical qualifications for leadership, not cultural. So is this man followed by other people, and does his character match up? You know, not does he keep a diary really well and never offends people with the way he speaks. You know, like I think that we can, if we're not careful, we can write off, you know, gold dust in terms of leaders. I mean, look around your church and see, you know, who are the sheep bleating to, that's been used in it, but it's particularly from those other communities. Who is it that's leading that, and does their character match up to the qualifications in the Bible? Not necessarily academic qualifications or social, you know, things. It's like who are your dodgy mates? And if you haven't got dodgy mates, who in your church can introduce you to dodgy mates? You know, because there will be people in your church that, and just being comfortable in your own skin. You have not got to, you know, it's not all of a sudden you've got to go blinky, blimey, love a duck. You know, it's just, you just be who God has created you to be absolutely secure in who God's made you to be, and you will cross cultures and relate to people far better than you know, you haven't got to be someone that you're not. Jesus related to tax collectors and whores, you know, but he was completely secure in who he was. And if you're not able, if you haven't got dodgy mates, look for people in the church that have got dodgy mates that can introduce you. You know, that kind of helps.